May I ask you a question?
Yes, you may.
Well, let me just say that I've known Earlie for about 30 years now, and Earlie's an easy guy to love, period. And I loved your work. I've been over twice to Houston to the Art League to see your exhibition, which I believe is still up.
Yes.
And I find it extraordinary. Nobody, or very few people in the postmodern conceptual world is doing the kind of work that you do, which is primarily straight documentary, unadorned work. And I know you grew up in Hattiesburg, and I know your grandmother was the family chronicler, kept everything.
Yes.
And who was it that got you interested in photography?
Well, it was my father and my grandmother and my physics instructor in high school. And I have to go back and kind of give you, I guess from the beginning. My grandmother kept a photo album. And on most holidays, back to school, especially Easter Sunday, and when we got new school clothes, my father would make pictures of us. I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And so he would buy us the little bomber jackets and the caps, and we would wear those, and he would line us up and make photographs. And I had 2 sisters, Carolyn and Maddie. My mother was always in the house cooking or whatever because we were stair steps, and we lived next door to my grandmother. But my grandmother kept a photo album in a Victrola that she had. And my grandmother was a jolly lady who told stories of how things were when she was a girl growing up. And a lot of times during the summertime, we'd be sitting on her front porch. Late in the evenings, mosquitoes out, lightning bugs, or either fireflies, as Keats called them, would be out and around. And people would pass from time to time. And they would say, "Hey, Miss Bonnie Jean," when they passed. And she would speak back, and she said, "Go in there and get Grand's album. That's Hubbard Harold. That's Diana Charlene." And I began to look at the album, and I could see them as small kids. They were in high school at the time. And so at an early age, I began to understand the importance of documenting one's community, who we are and what we do from day to day, special holidays, and these things. And in that album was photographs of my father's tour of duty while he was in the Army at various places. There was other people's in there, and there was obituaries of people who had died. There was one newspaper article of Jesse L. Brown. Matter of fact, the movie is coming out on the 23rd of November is in honor of Jesse L. Brown, the first African-American flyer that was shot down over Korea. And Jesse grew up in our neighborhood. I did not know him. I knew his daughter. But my grandmother had all of this information, and she kept up with it. Our first nursery rhymes, our first Easter Sunday program that we went to. She wrote down the dates, and she kept up with the chronicle of that.
You grew up and then you went to Vietnam. Did you photograph in Vietnam?
Yes, I did. My father had a camera when he was in service, and a boy wanting to be like his father, I bought a small camera after boot camp and began to take pictures around the base of us. Because after boot camp, we was able to unbutton our top collar, sit on the bunks.
Yay.
And as we was going overseas on ship, which we left California, Long Beach on the USS Valley Forge, there's just Lenawee, and went from there to Hawaii, from Hawaii to the Philippines. And going there, I began to make photographs. And when we did a beachhead landing in Vietnam, I had a little Kodak Instamatic, the kind that you take and you advance the film, you put the cartridges in. I was in the second wave. So I shot a few pictures getting to the popper boats. When we came to land, I had the little camera. For whatever the reason, I made a few photographs. And all through Vietnam, when I was able to, I made photographs sparingly. Sometime after a combat mission, things of this nature, the perils of war or what happens. Still, for whatever the reason, I made a few photographs. So I have several photographs in Vietnam.
And then you go to Texas Southern University, I believe you told me, to study art. What made you go to segue to photography?
Well, it wasn't that I decided to graduate to photography. It happened by accident. I rode a Greyhound bus to Texas, the same as you took the Greyhound bus to New York.
Yeah. Really?
My physics instructor was teaching us the difference between a chemical change and a physical change. And what he ended up doing was using a match and a piece of paper and lighting it. That's a physical change. The drugstore negatives and the light box, 1001, 1002, that was a chemical change. At that point, I was hooked, but I didn't realize it. The same as I saw the light. You saw the light in that photograph.
It's a good song.
And that stuck with me. Coming to Texas, studying art in the art department, I discovered there was a dark room in the art department. Didn't know anything about it. We were on campus making photographs on Juneteenth. There was a guy named Nathaniel Sweets from East St. Louis, Illinois, and he was making photographs. And I said, hey man, I have a camera in my room. He said, why don't you go and get it? I can develop the film. And that's how it started. One day, coming down the hallway in the art department was John Biggers, head of the art department. And I said, Doc, I said, I heard there's a dark room in the art department. Can I use it? He said, sure, man. He reached his hand in his pocket, pulled out the keys, handed it to me, and said, it's through the printmaking room. I went in there and looked, and everything in there was foreign to me. Never had seen an enlarger. I went back across campus and got sweets. We ran over, we went down to Southwestern Camera on Main, got a box of paper, came back. He showed me how to use the enlarger. And I remembered the pictures that we made from the contact sheets in high school. And from there, hey, photography for me was born. I took a class in photography from Mr. Evans, and Dr. Freeman came looking for me. I became Mr. Evans' student assistant. And Freeman came looking for me and said, are you Earlie Hudnall? I said, yes, I am. He said, I need a photographer. He said, Mr. Evans sent me to see you. Will you come to my office and talk to me? I said, yes, I will. I did, and he hired me for the Model Cities program. President Johnson, Great Society. But how I got to Texas was because of Dr. Freeman. I had a friend named Alfred Blackwell Silsby Todd Jr., who was home out of school on academic probation. His mother sent him to college with a new car, and he was majoring in pharmacy. And for whatever the reason, he didn't make the cut. So he was home. And I told him I was going to go to school at Southern or either the University of Southern Mississippi. And he said, why don't you come and go to Texas Southern? They have a great art department. Get me an application. And he did. The rest is history. I rode a Greyhound bus and came to Texas. And it was Freeman who came looking for me, who had put Todd out of school, and it was Todd that had asked me to come to school at Texas. This is how I got to Texas.
That's a good story.
And into the Fourth Ward, making pictures for the Model Cities program, I began to see the closeness of the houses, some of the shotgun houses, the two-story shotgun houses, the cobblestone streets with the bricks laid there, and began to understand the history of the Fourth Ward, the closeness of the people sitting on their porches in the afternoons and so forth, the laughter, the kids playing, and it was like a closed, sacred community. Not a lot of traffic on the streets and so forth, but on most weekends, I gravitated to the Fourth Ward, Saturdays and Sundays, and whenever I had an opportunity to, after I ended up doing my work for the program per se. And this has been my lifelong dream, is to, wherever I go, I like to get off of the beaten path to see how people live, the universality of the human spirit, the struggle of humanity, how we interact with each other, and our trials and our tribulations. All of this is very important to me.
And it shows.
Yeah.
It shows in your work. And that's at least in my opinion, relatively rare in today's art world. You don't see it quite as much. So one of my unwitting mentors was the great mythologist Joseph Campbell. And I watched, like some of you, that great series with Bill Moyers interviewing him. Mm-hmm. And he said something that just rocked my world. Of course, I'm an adult at this point. He said, accidents in your life can often become main plots. And there's not a person here that probably doesn't understand that. Well, it's just one of those phrases that coursed right through me. I was just at the right time to hear it. It's influenced how I think about my own work. But if you go way back, we were a single-parent household. And when I was 6, my father went to Alaska for unknown reasons and promptly drowned. And my mother was a photographer of sorority girls before she had me. And in our little town, she started a small studio, and she specialized in children. So I grew up around her making photographs of kids and blah, 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 blah. But the other thing was, when I decided I was in college, I was lucky to be in college, and I really wanted to see if I could make photographs. And I borrowed her camera. It's not a macho thing to do, but she had a twin lens Rolleiflex camera.
Your best kind.
Yeah, it was a good camera. And she showed me how to load it, and I went down to the river. The Neches River runs through our town, and I photographed some guys fishing. It wasn't a great picture, it was just guys fishing, but I had to talk to them, and I made these photographs. And then I took them to Majestic Photo Finishers to have them processed, and then I went and showed my mom. And my mom said, "Honey, you have a good eye. You have a nice sense of light." Swear to you, that's what she said. I still remember the words. And I thought, my mom says I have a good eye and I have a nice sense of light. And for better or worse, that was enough for me. I really wanted to go. I just became on fire. And I can tell you now, over 50 years later, I'm still on fire. I move a little slower, but, you know,
but
still on fire.
Keith, when you said that the photograph that you saw, and it was not the image, but it was the light, the reflection from behind it that inspired you.
Oh, Fireflies. Yeah.
No, the picture in your mother's studio.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she had a photograph of probably a 6-year-old girl sitting on a stool. Mm-hmm. Cameras here, bodies turned a little bit to the side, heads turned this way, which is a classic kind of thing. But it was backlit.
Yeah. And
I'd never seen that. It's like sunlight, you know, backlighting somebody. And I was just electrified. It's utter simplicity, but I hadn't seen it. And it influences my work to today. I still pay close attention to the little light.
I see it in all of your work. I see the light
thank you.
there. And your trip after you was able to really to explore around, and you went to New York, and you talked about some of the photographs that they brought out for you to look at wasn't perfect. You know, the spotting and how...
Well, let me tell the story.
Okay, but tell it.
That's a good story.
Yeah, but I want to hear that.
I did the most hillbilly thing you could do when I was 23, 24. I took the Greyhound bus to New York City, And I did it because it was the least expensive way to get to New York City in those days. And I'd just gotten out of college, and anyway, you know, my dollars were precious. And I saved up enough money, I thought I could stay a month. I got the least expensive place, the Hotel Albert, down near the Bowery, on the 6th floor of a walk-up, and I'd written the Museum of Modern Art. And in my ignorance or hubris or what have you, I said I was a serious student of photography, and could I please come visit your collection? Because I felt the dire need to see the real thing, which wasn't shown in my community, and it wasn't shown that much in Houston that I was aware of. And some sweet intern wrote back, handwritten note, sure, come on up. And it's detailed I could come for 3 days a week for 2 to 4 hours a day. So I did. And I got off the bus at the Greyhound station. It was starting to rain, starting to snow. It was February. I started walking, because I wasn't taking a cab, downtown. I'd never been to New York. And I passed a guy with a chalkboard, like a restaurant chalkboard around his neck. And he had a baby carriage there and a big fat cat in a cage on the baby carriage. And his sign, the chalkboard, said, poems, $1. And I walked right by him. And then I thought, you know, man, that's bad karma. Go back there, give him $1. Well, my dollars were precious. Anyway, I go back and I give him $1. And he read me the first poem on his chalkboard, which was, I swear to you, rock your ass off.
Yep.
I kid you not. And that consisted of snow coming down, guy from Texas off the bus, standing in front of him, and he's yelling at the top of his lungs at different cadences and musical intonations, rock your ass off, rock your ass off, rock your ass off. I was mesmerized. And all the way down to the Hotel Albert, I thought, all right, buddy, you know, you get through with this, you're going to take the bus back, and you're going to rock your ass off. Think of it as a bad metaphor, you know, and I still think of that.
Well,
you know?
you have been rocking your ass off ever since.
Well, he works all the time, and it's one of the reasons we like each other as much. I like to work all the time. I think we need a new definition of work, you know, sometimes. Yeah. I don't think it's something you just have to do for money that you hate sometimes or what have you. I mean, it's just something you have a passion for doing, or as well as keeping your body and soul together.
Yeah.
And
well, you know, I admire you because you're still printing your own work and the tones. Why did you move toward the selenium toner, brown toner, as we see it here? Is that because of your relationship with the community in which you grew up in, around Beaumont, the underworld, as I would say it, that you are so more or less in tune to? Seem like the animals all appreciate you and respect you. You know, people often say, Earlie, how do you go into the neighborhood and you never have any problem? But Keith, how do you go into the swamps with the alligators, the mosquitoes, the snakes, and feel completely at ease and comfort? And yet still the transformation of what you end up doing, the light still comes through.
yeah.
And how you interpret that and your relationship with the animals. Can you explain a little bit about
that? Yeah, there's a twofold question, and then we'll get back to asking you a question here. That I've always toned my photographs rather than just a monochromatic patina to them. You can use various chemicals to change the tonalities. And I got that because I saw an exhibition of Paul Strand.
Yeah.
And that was at the Metropolitan Museum, which didn't show photographs that much in New York. And I was mesmerized. His prints were dark by Ansel Adams standards. And that was a great standard if you did monochromatic work. But they had colors, you know, subtle colors, purples and blues and violets, if you looked really carefully. And that just rocked my world. And I went, how did he do that? So I go and, anyway, make a long story short, some people told me, well, he's using gold chloride toning, and you can try selenium, and I won't bore you with all that. So I started experimenting with a lot of arcane toners, and I still use toners. I'm not fond of, in my own work, just a straight black and white print. I think it gives it a different depth in some respects. And I already forgot the second part of what I was going to tell you.
Well, how you are able to more or less mesmerize
Oh, the swamps,
your environment
animals,
in the
yeah.
swamps.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I work on projects. Earlie's work, I admire for a lot of reasons, but Earlie's been doing the same area over and over and over and evolving it. And I don't have that kind of mindset or project. I kind of go from one thing to another that interests me. Although I still try to make a transcendental, more or less transcendental view of what I'm looking at. And I always had an affection for animals, period. And I use the term really loosely. It can be a reptile or it can be a mammal, you know, just something besides ourselves, that kind of thing. So anytime I could put them or use them in my work, I tried to photograph them. But this is ridiculous, but I always feel that they have a different consciousness. You know, they see me, but they don't see me like I see them. And I won't belabor that point, but they deserve a certain respect.
Yeah.
Minor respect to me. The thing about being an artist is you don't always have a clear reason. Sometimes it's intuitive. You just feel this needs to be done, or this is a worthwhile use of my time and money for, I'll give it a year, and I'm going to make 18 pictures that matter to me. It's like a goal, you know, that kind of thing. The thing, Earlie worked in a university. You had a full-time job. I work in a university. It's a full-time job. But when you have time off, where does he go? He goes straight to the 3rd Ward, 4th Ward, and he does all this work over and over, all these years. That's an aristocrat to me. Or as we say where I come from, that ain't no sissy boy. That takes a certain, you know what.
Yeah.
You know? So, it's not an intellectual thing. And I think that I'm on the lookout for other mammals or other reptiles.
Well,
And I think of them as portraits.
it's the portrait, your placement of animals. It reminded me of a lot of the work of Kermit Oliver.
I love his paintings.
And
yeah.
how you interact with poetry, the animals, the underworld, the ghosts, as we call them, haints. And
Haints,
as
yeah.
there were a term that people used to say that children that were born with a veil over their faces could see the underworld and could see the things that the average person could not see or feel. But when I look at Keats' work, I see a lot of that. His connection to the environment. Man has to be able to coexist with nature. John Biggers always told us that in our art classes. And I see that in Keats' work. especially the animals, Ezekiel horse, the things that you end up doing over and over and over again. And I'm wondering, I see most of your work is not completely in focus. Is that for
Are you kidding me? What's not in focus?
Well, I mean the soft focusedness of it, or the softness of it. Is that an interconnection between you and the subjects?
Well, I lost the vision in my left eye, and you have two eyes, you have binocular vision. It's what gives you depth. And I don't have depth.
Yeah.
Like other people, that kind of thing. And I always have loved what I couldn't see in some photographs. If there was something sharp, I like what we call short depth of field. The human eye can't focus closer than 8 inches, that kind of thing. So sometimes it's the first time you've seen something, if you use a macro lens or something like that. So I was just basically experimenting. I thought, I see in short depth of field, so I will start using short focus, shall we say. And I liked the mystery, that was back in the background, in the shadows, depending on the subject matter, that kind of thing. That's how that evolved. But I get restless. Do you ever get restless?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
You've retired now from Texas Southern University.
I left Texas Southern. I'm not retired.
You've left Texas Southern.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What's your plan, big boy?
Well, it's to continue to work and to go back through my negatives to print some things that I've overlooked over the years. Because when you're juxtapositioned with two bodies of work, the university and your own personal work, mind you have to remember, I was shooting, processing, and printing and delivering the same day or the next morning. And then in between, I was making photographs for myself. And so you have to put aside your work in order to make the work for the university, in order to make the payroll, in order to be paid. And then when you had time, you go back and you would make a print for yourself. So, and then there were selective prints that I've made over the years. There's alternate prints that I have not made pictures of. And I want to go back and to do that because I was reading where you made, I think it was a full roll of pictures from Fireflies. But it came to my mind, I said, probably it was the first frame that he made was the picture. So often as photographers, we telepathically see or feel the image. The subject speaks to us. We make the photograph, not take the photograph. We make the image. And normally if you make 4 or 5 frames, it's normally the first frame. First what you saw, what you felt is what we record.
It is. You're right. That's an interesting point. I mean, from a photographer's standpoint.
Yeah.
It's generally the first frame. They have I believe the contact sheet that I'd made a picture years ago in the 90s called Fireflies, and it was 2 little boys, about 6 or 8, and they had gotten a jar of fireflies, and it was the end of the day, and the light was coming from behind, and they were so excited. I had my camera on a tripod. I saw those 2 little guys doing that, and I had 1 roll of film in my camera that had 12 frames, so I just started making photographs of them, saying, "Hey guys, hold still." Nothing eloquent, nothing brilliant. "Hey, hold still. Please hold still." And they totally ignored me because they were having such a good time with the... And I go back and I developed this roll of film, and I was so depressed. They were all a blur, except the jar of fireflies, which was just pretty much, And I go and I showed it to my wife, Pat, who was always my ideal viewer. That's a great thing to have, as an ideal viewer. Somebody who will look at your work and tell you the truth, and you respect what they have to say. And she said, "Oh, go print one." And I said, "They're out of focus." Mr. Anal Retentive. And she said, "Go print one." So, make a long story short, I go back to the darkroom and I print one. And I take it back to her in the tray, wet, and I said, "This is out of focus." And she said, "Oh my gosh. Bring me back the contact sheet. Print that one. And print it big." Point being, it was a mistake, and it was probably the first image I ever had. I put it in an edition of 50. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that are interested in such things, that whole edition closed, which is shows you my judgment. Right. So that's how that came. Well, it was a mistake, but accidents in your life can sometimes be a main plot. And it made me think that I always loved the transcendental nature of our lives in some respect. It made me think that, well, there was something transcendental happened there. And it's all around us. And sometimes you just have to reach up and grab
Mm-hmm.
it or talk to it. Now, I know that's nebulous. I understand that. But that's how I think. And sometimes that kind of thinking is what makes you make the picture. You know what's right. You don't always know what might be new for you.
Yeah.
You just don't always know that. So, anyway. Well, what's next for you besides printing all these?
Back into the community.
Back into the
metamorphosis, the changes taking place, and how it is affecting how people live. And in most communities, wherever I travel and wherever I go, I always try to get off of the beaten path, like I've always said. I search for the kinds of memories of people that I've known and that I've seen in places that I've visited, the stories that my grandmother would tell, the stories that my father would tell. My father was a guy who came from Meridian, Mississippi by way of the U.S. Army, and then working for H&L and then the Hercules Power Company as a switchman on the railroad and retired as the engineer. But he brought the country with him. We had a garden, we had hogs, we had a couple of goats, and these kinds of things. We fished and we hunted, and I had a unique opportunity of experiencing these kinds of things. The dampness, the carpet of the earth as you walk through the forest in the fall of the year. And so, and then in conjunction with that, my mentor, John Biggers, when I went to North Carolina, he took me back to the birth of the Civil War up near Kings Mountain. And it was so eerie feeling. You can see the concave of the bunkers and the places where guys had fought and died, and it reminded me of Vietnam. But also, it brings me back to my own personal work that I see with homelessness on our streets and how people struggle from day to day to exist. We all want the same things. We all desire the same thing. But how do we reach that? How do we attain that? And so in my work, I try to make an effort to put it before the viewer to come to his or her own conclusion as to how you relate to it based upon your own personal experiences. Life, death, rejoice, and all of that. A lot of people think that it was kind of eerie, but I photographed my father in his last years, my mother as well, and also my two brothers, and I also photographed them in their coffin. And I put it aside and I look at it. And the reason why for that, my father had an old trunk kind of a traveling trunk that you fold that had places for your suits and your drawers and so forth. And in the drawer under his white shirt was a picture of a lady in a coffin. And that was Grandma Harriet, the lady who raised him. And I always would see that photograph in there. He said, put it back. But that was his mother's mother who actually raised my father. And for whatever the reason, I don't know, maybe that was the reason why when I looked at the work of Jane Vanderzee's, the funeral parlors or whatever, but I was moved to photograph them in the coffin. And from time to time, that's my way of relating and going back and being in tune with them and actually seeing them as they are.
You mentioned James Vanderzee, which was extraordinary. He was a commercial photographer as
Sure.
well as did what we would call art. How important was Roy DeCavera?
Oh, Roy DeCavera. Oh,
I went and
man.
heard him talk in New York once.
I met him at the MFA with John
He's
Biggers.
a lovely man.
And the softness of how he uses the tones. I developed my own way of printing using selenium, not selenium toner, but
Potassium ferrocyanide.
soft, Selectol soft, and
Oh,
Dectol.
the developer. Yeah.
The developer. The tones and how he was able to print was so important. And looking at his prints and looking at this show, it was an inspiration to me. Same as when you went to New York to look at those photographs. The same as going to Photo Fest and seeing the works there.
That's that. I mean, none of you are young, or most of you are not, sophomores in the university world. But and most of you, I would think, would agree. There is no substitute for going and seeing the real thing.
That's right.
If you can, it's second best thing is to get the book or the catalog and pour over. But if you see the real thing, sometimes it just courses through you. It never leaves you. It will imperceptibly change you in some ways. And on occasion, it will bring you to tears. Just because the physical brush strokes or the depth of the shadow in a photo. I mean, see the real thing if you can, in my opinion.
I saw your photograph of J. Mason Brewer, the dog on the front cover. But
That
my
book killed
mentor,
me, yeah.
John Biggers, done an illustration for J. Mason Brewer, the book.
Did he do that one?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was looking and I saw that. But I had the opportunity to watch him paint, to watch Kermit Oliver paint, and how John would start off with just the scribbling, how he would use the charcoal and straight lines and boom, and almost to dematerialize it using the African model as his work transposed from first he was following the Italian model before he went to Africa and when he returned, but how he paint and how he changes and the brush strokes, and I was able to watch all of that. And it had a great influence upon me as to how I approach my photography, the work ethics of Kermit, the same way, and then so forth. We don't need much in order to survive, to find a peace of serenity within one's work. Sleeping in the dark room was no problem for me. Getting up early in the morning and going into the dark room. And when I would go to John Biggers' house at 7:30 in the morning, and he would be in the studio after he had retired. And he would work until 11:30 and then go back at 2 in the evening. And then late in the evening, he'd say, "Come on, man, let's go to the studio."
Come on, man.
And then he would take a mirror.
Let's go.
And over his shoulder, he would look at the painting. And he would say, "Uh-huh." And he would go back there and he'd take his brush and go into the solution, and he just started to paint it out just like this. Then he'd take a piece of chalk and he'd go back and he'd put it in. He said, "I'll change that in the morning." And seeing the simplicity of that, and then trying to mimic that in the dark room when I'm printing. You know, I'll make a print and then go back and then look at it, and people say, Hudnall, isn't that paper expensive? I say, yeah, but I'll take a whole sheet of paper to make a test print first to be able to look. Then you got to hang it and you got to let it dry. You got to look at the tones of it, and then you come back and then you know exactly what you have to do. It's almost like a surgeon. You got to burn, or you got to dodge, or either more tone or whatever.
And you have to view it under the correct light.
That's right.
Otherwise, it's too light when you get it out, or too dark when you get it out.
That's right.
Now, I love you like a brother, but we have gotten the...
Okay, the time?
Yeah.
Oh, so we got some questions coming, huh?
We can open it up for questions, and I don't want it to go beyond an hour. We've got like 10 minutes or so. So if anybody has any
You sure are a
questions.
taskmaster.
Yeah.
I'm the boss man today.
Yes, ma'am.
So how long did you end up staying in New York?
Oh, me?
You said you
Oh,
stayed in
I thought I had saved up enough money to stay a month. I probably stayed 2 weeks at the most, you know. But boy, taking that bus back through about 7 states to get to Texas, to get to Beaumont, Texas, on the Greyhound, a whole time I just kept thinking of what an extraordinary thing I'd seen. You know, they let me in free because I was from Texas and they liked my accent. They being interns, you know. I saw so many things that just changed my world. Anyway, you know how important that kind of thing is, and if you get a really good teacher, you know, that's a wonderful thing. If you get somebody that will nurture you, and sometimes they're not the most articulate people, sometimes. He's great, and we can talk about it, and there's so much we could continue to talk about. 2 weeks anyways, to answer the question. Anybody else?
Question for Earlie. Since you're going back and looking at earlier work and thinking about it, and thinking about making new prints, how do you approach it now that's different? And what are you learning from it now that's different than maybe it was 10 years ago?
Well, it's surprising. You look at how people change, how society have changed, and you play that in my work personally against the architecture, the tapestry of the city. Neighborhoods have changed, demographics have changed. Students, and I say students because of the university, which was a great resource for me as far as the diversity of students from all parts of the world, from India, Africa, Pakistan, Iran, and so forth. And I have friends that I made among all of those, but yet still in the community, there is a continuum of change. And I want to go back and look at some of my work, the negatives, and things that I pushed aside at that time that I felt that wasn't as important. And once you begin to look, and you begin to look at the storefronts, the signage, the message that you see among the work, it becomes more and more, important. And really, it inspires me to go ahead and to document the changes that is taking place now, especially along a lot of the freeway construction, the underground, the underworld, the layers of asphalt as to how it is stacked and how it changes and so forth. But it's just I guess it's the tempo of the city, in the city life, but yet still off of the beaten path, how the country life basically have changed, how people live and coexist.
Thank you.
I have a question submitted via Instagram for you. Can Keith tell us a little bit about his upcoming book? And Earlie, do you have a book in the works?
Well, I have this book, which is, believe it or not, my first publication, the Art League of Houston, publish this, and this is the first, I hope, of several to come. And on the back, I have the number 3 wash tub, the bottom of it. And this wash tub was at home, hanging on the back of the house. And I can remember a number of times from over the years that this was the bathtub.
That's a great title, number 3 wash tub.
Uh-huh.
Can't you see the typography? Yeah, sans serif. Yes.
Early when I look at your work,
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I feel so anchored to the ground, you know, in community and how important it is just to be present with each other, you know. I mean, I see all this joy with the children you photograph. I'm a family photographer, and I see that. I see a lot of that. I just so connect with that.
Sure.
But then there's a lot of photos in here that there's a lot of gravity to them. You can tell this is not the most happy moment, you know. And this is just how we are. This is the ups and downs of being human, and it's just beautiful to see this kind of captured. And I just feel grounded. And then when I look at your work, Keith, I'm not even on the earth anymore. Like, I don't even know where I am when I see it. I like that there's both of these in this one place.
Well,
Just so
thank you.
grateful for this. I love contrast in my photos, and I've never seen such contrast in an exhibition before. I just think this is amazing
Well,
work
thank
from
you.
both of you. Thank you for.
Every time thank you very much. Every time I've seen Earlie's work over the years, particularly in person, I'm always struck. It's just a real affirmation of life. You know, there's a certain exuberance to it. There's a certain realism that's not exuberant on occasion to it, and it's unadorned, but really smartly done. You know, just from a technical standpoint and from a visual standpoint, but they're so human. You know, I had a question for you. I'm curious about. To me, you use gesture a lot, not wild gesture, but there are gestures in the bodies. You know, that really tell stories. You know, some of the younger boys. You know, you photograph a kid with a shirt with a collar. That does one thing to your psyche when you see that picture. You don't even think. You see that same kid without a shirt and no collar. That changes things. Sometimes you can't articulate it, but it's more vulnerable in some ways, and you see more lines, like a line drawing, and it's really interesting and smart, you know, intelligent, and humane work. You know, I really love it.
Thank you. But
You're
you
welcome.
never interfere with your subject.
The heck you say?
I observe, and then I make the photograph. Your work take one outside of time and space.
Get out of town.
No, but it does. If you look at it, it carries you to places. It invades your mind. It causes you to think, what was the photographer thinking about of the blackbirds in the tree when you see them all there? And you know how they gather in the fall. I can remember the robins in the
Yeah.
fall of the year,
Yeah.
who comes in on the cold days and just light down and so forth and on. And we would take our BB guns and be out there harvesting robins to roast over the fire as little boys and so forth and on.
But we're sorry now.
Yeah. But to see and to experience nature that particular way, or the swamps, the mosquitoes, the fishing, watching out for the snakes, the alligators and the things of this nature, you know, there's a sense of bravery that you have to be in tune with nature. You have to know how to, you know, maneuver. And the same thing within the inner city, in neighborhoods with personalities of people. And so really it's all about life. And it's how we enjoy it, how we experience it, and how we capture it, make the photographs of it, and present it to you, the viewer, to come to your own conclusion based upon your personal experiences.
Does anybody else have a question?
Have you, either of you, have you ever taken a photo and was there ever a point to where you noticed you stopped taking photos and started making photos?
That's an existential question.
Yeah.
That's not a criticism, that's just what it is.
And the reason I ask is because, and Earlie mentioned it a couple of times about making photos, and I know
Yeah.
you reference it the same way.
I do.
But when you say you're really not, you don't interfere
Yeah.
with your subject, right? So at what point do you make that photograph?
You want to take that one?
Well, when I connect with the subject, I never stalk a person. I observe a person. And by body language, your presence of being there, their curiosity as to what you're doing, why you have the camera. And then when they feel that there's no threat, then that person can open up and be themselves. And when a person can be themselves and you observe and you admire the person and you really look at the dignity of whomever it is, no matter what they are wearing, no matter who they are, it's an admiration for what the gift that is being given to you as a photographer, to have the opportunity at this time and this moment to make the picture. And this is when it happened before the camera. The subject has to be more or less in agreement with the photographer.
That's a good phrase.
And so that eye contact, I see it in Keith's work. Little boy holding how he wanted to be photographed, and one that had the head of the duck in his hands, and different things of this nature, and so forth. If you look at hip hop, hey, mister, take my picture. But I didn't tell him how to pose. I never ask a person how to pose. I never say, ma'am, may I make y'all a picture? It's very seldom a person asks me, say, will you make a picture for me? I say, sure. And then again, I'll move in such a direction to cause my subject to maybe to turn. But in most cases, I will see the subject sitting, doing whatever they are doing, and I'll come into their presence and relax and observe. And then I'll carefully raise my camera and make a photograph. Maybe only one or two, and then I'm on my way. I'll nod, they'll nod, and that's it. Sometimes a small conversation, but in most cases, no.
Yeah, I call them perfect moments. That's not lengthy times. It's when you've got 50 years of experience and you know what you're trying to do. You probably only need 2 or 3 frames, on a good day, that kind of thing. If it's an inanimate object, which is what I've been doing the last couple of years during the pandemic, I try to make every millimeter count. Sometimes that means be ruthless with space. Just be ruthless. And I use a square format. And I like that because I find it completely democratic. Everything's equal. There's not a vertical or horizontal that I need to work with. And therefore I know what should be in there and how important the edges are, whether you're doing a 35 millimeter format, rectangular things, or you're doing square formats. The subject matter is one thing. The content within that frame is a whole nother element to me.
I noticed that some of your images are vertical. They're not square.
Well, when I started using an 8x10 view camera to go...
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I don't recommend it.
Okay. I thought you all were still with the Hasselblad. Okay, that's interesting.
No.
Okay.
On that project, to make a long story short, I spent most of my time whining. It was heavy. I was doing wet plate collodion, which is nasty. And if you're wearing chest waders and you fall, do you know how much water weighs? It's like, for a gallon, it's like 7 pounds.
Yeah.
It's really hard to move, you know, and get yourself out of there. But that's a whole nother story. So.
It's been wonderful.